Hey, Paul.
Hey, Fab, how you doing?
I'm good.
I sound like a mafioso because of my cold, but it's good. Maybe I'll scare people into listening to me more.
Nice. I gotta admit, this is a really interesting topic. I find it's kind of timely for me too. I've been seeing a lot of this actually in the past little while. Um, Entitled it "Why Most Companies Can't Follow a Sales Process." And I do have some specific questions, and I also have some very specific point of views on it. So I think this will be an interesting discussion. Um, but just so everybody's on the same page, like, can you just set the table and just like, what's the sales process like? Go quickly. We have a whole episodes on sales processes and all that, but just so that we are all on the same page here.
Well, a sales process is sort of what you do as you walk through what happens with the relationship and the client from the first time you speak to them to when you close them and they become your client, and maybe in a recurring world too. So very rapidly, you have a process for your introduction. What do you say to them? Then you have a prospect, a process when you're having a discovery call with them, like the questions you might ask or the things you want to find out. Then you might have some other steps after that. Some people, you can have a variety of different steps. You can, confirm what you learned in the discovery. You might go over, then you might have a presentation stage or a proposal stage, and then you might have a closing stage. So, very broadly, that's a process, and everyone has a process, right? Every time you make a sale, there's a process going on. The question is, do you have a written and, sort of repetitive process that helps you ensure that you don't forget to do anything specific, and that helps you help your client?
Okay.
That to me is a description of the process. I don't know. Do you see it any differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would like to accentuate is kind of the process is that it's a repeatable process, right? Because
Yeah.
you're right. Every time a sale happens, stuff happens. But if Steve does it one way and Melissa does it the other way, that's not really a process. That's just how they sell as
Well, it is
reps.
it is a process, but you're right. It's their process at that point in time, but they haven't written it down or created something they're going to follow. So I know what you're saying. So semantics,
Yeah.
it is a process. Is it a repeatable, written, intelligent process? No, but it's still a process, right? So
Fair
I
enough. So here we're talking about the repeatable, right? Like, because it's
sure.
easy, maybe not the best way to do it, but easy to let your reps go wild and do whatever they need to do. So why for you is it important to follow a repeatable sales process?
Well, I guess it's important because if like some people say, well, I'm a natural, it just happens. And that's fine. But there's a few problems with being a natural and just following your instinct, in that, first of all, the day where things start going wrong, you won't know why they went wrong. And you won't know what to adjust because you're a natural, right? So and the other thing is, if you're trying to help other people on the team, well, you won't know how to help them because you don't know what you do. The other thing too is, if you're just a natural and you do whatever, well, everyone's doing different things. And when you're talking together about where you're at in your process, well, people are saying all kinds of things. There's no organization. One guy might say, yeah, it's really close to closing. I think we're 50% there. And they mean something entirely different from the other person who says, oh yeah, I'm 75% there. So no organization, no structure, no way to be cohesive. It would be like, I've been watching the show on the Romans and the barbarians fighting together. It would be like a bunch of disorganized fighters in a war that are doing just just go out there and do whatever. And then you have like these Roman tactics that were super, like, engineered. They had a real process, and it helped them. Like, they were, let's say, 100 people fighting 100 people. Well, they had all these processes and ways they worked to make it work as a unit, and it worked a lot better. So if you have a sales process, you can follow the best practices. The other advantage of having a sales process is you can take the best practices from everyone, put them into a created sales process, and add them to your situation. So if one of your colleagues, let's say we're the first people to ever sell, we're on another planet. And one guy says, well, I always ask open-ended questions. Oh, that's good. Okay, so that's going to be part of my process. It's going to be part of my methodology in my discovery process. I need to find these things out. Okay, and oh, this guy's really good at making the first call. Okay, well, you can absorb that. So it's taking the best of everything, putting it together, and creating a process. Now, that's great and beautiful. And I'll tell you, Fab, a lot of people do this. My problem, and the reason I came up with this subject, is why is it so hard for companies to follow that sales process?
Okay, but so before we jump into like the thick of it, I wanted to kind of understand, because you mentioned like at the top of the show, like kind of some general steps, right? Your presentation, what you're going to say in your discovery, and what you're going to say, and maybe there's a demo or a presentation, and all that stuff. Like, taking in mind that obviously every company is different, right? Like, what do you normally see as the most challenging part of the sales process?
The most challenging part of the process that people have a hard time following is discovery. Introduction, people get it very quickly and they adopt it and they use it. What most people have a hard time is sticking to a proper discovery call. They quickly want to go into demo or presentation. Because they don't understand the value of discovery.
So yeah, and that's really interesting. And so yeah, definitely the weakest part, the discovery. Okay, so now the moment everybody's been waiting for. I mean, you have your point. We didn't prepare this. You have your point of view. I have my point of view. Let's see if we match up, add up, confront. This will be fun. So, according to you, why do most salespeople fail to follow their sales process?
Well, so there's 2 points here. The point I think that I was making just before is that, well, I don't think I know because I was making the point, is that in a sales process that people are following to a certain extent, the hardest thing for them to do is the discovery, right? So they're not asking enough open-ended questions. They're not going deep enough to find out about not only the problems and the opportunities, but the need, the wants, the motivation, right? And we've done podcasts on that, and maybe we should redo one again. But that's the part of the sales process the hardest. The part of the sales process that people are best at is presenting. Every company seems to be really good at presenting.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously depending on the size of the organization. Obviously, when you get to a certain size, I should say, you'll often have like product marketing team, like teams dedicated to like kind of selling their product or their service. And it's also easier to compare and contrast. And even as a service-based business, like I don't know how you operate, but I'm constantly tweaking how I work. So then it's easy for me to talk about how I work because I'm constantly thinking about how I work, and companies are constantly thinking about how they deliver their product. So it makes sense that that's the bigger part of
course,
the training.
it makes sense that people focus a lot on that, and I agree with you. But if you don't do a proper discovery, it's human psychology. It's not even it's human psychology. Anyone that feels that something has been sold to them, unless they really want it, you're diminishing your chances of success. But you know what, Fab? That's one problem. Okay, that's following parts of the process. But what I was really thinking of when I suggested this title to you, and you said yes, I love it for maybe different reasons. My reason is that what I've noticed is a lot of companies have a sales process. They've done it well. They've built it. They've worked with you, or they work with me and you together, and they've created. They're even working on HubSpot, but they have a really hard time following it. I'm thinking to myself, why is it so hard? And I think the reason that it's so hard is because a lot of sales leaders don't take the time to explain the sales process. Sort of you and I will spend time with the leaders. You and I will spend time with the sales leaders, or even the owners of the company. We'll put together a great sales process. They get it, but they don't always take the time to really explain it in terms that make sense to the people that'll be using the sales process. So,
and I'll add to that. And I think, I mean, you do more sales processes than I do. Like I'll kind of hop in and and look maybe at some efficiencies that help build reports to determine the efficiency of it. But what I feel is that a lot of leaders, while they believe they understand why the sales process is there, I think at the end of the day, a lot of them don't really believe that a scalable, repeatable sales process is that important, right? They all believe that, not all, they believe that they hired superstar salespeople. And yes, Paul, this is how we should do it. I completely agree with you. But Melissa's great, and if she skips a few questions or whatever, that's okay because she's good at closing business. And how quickly they revert back to like this instinct of like, I know how to run my sales team. I hired great salespeople, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I think what it is, Fab, is that sales is still seen by a lot of people as this mystical sort of quality that some people have. And I'll tell you what the mysticism is that these people, the people who are really good at sales, know how to connect with people and understand how to get to a point where they really understand their clients' needs. So, but that, I think that's only part of the problem, because if you have a really good sales process and you take the time to properly explain it to your team and they're following it, and if your team doesn't see the advantage of following the sales process, you need to ask them why. Why do you see this as a burden more than helping you? Well, I've been doing it differently, and you really need to take that into consideration. Right? So but they really, your team really has to understand the benefits of the sales process, or else you're just ramming something down their throat.
Yeah.
And that's important. There's also something that, and I wanted to bring this up today, that's a bit of a surprise. There's something that we don't talk about in the sales process, and that's sort of the methodology, the open questions, the communication skills, the body language, the spoken word. Like, it's funny because we forget to remind people of that in the sales process, because I think I've shown you that slide, and it's been around for years, 7, 38, 55. So 7% of what someone retains of a message you gave to them is actually the words you used. 38% is your tone of voice, and 55% is your body language. So, just to make an example of that, if I say, hello, Fab, okay, I said hello. And if I say, hello, Fab, if I say, hello, Fab, those 3 hello Fabs don't mean the same thing, but we never talk about that in our sales process. And the problem is, it's a lot more subtle than that, because if you've got a salesperson that's talking 10% too fast, that's asking good questions, but not giving the time to the client to respond, or is really fidgety and not really, he's looking at his notes while the person answers them, this has a huge effect. But we don't put that in our sales process. We don't put reminder, proper state of mind, but we should do that. And so that's another issue I have. And I think that we should probably look at that. Now,
if I could just jump onto that, I think you're right. Like, it's not included. I think, but I think that illustrates like a broader issue with the sales process, which also ties into what you were saying. If people don't believe in it, I think a lot of times a sales process is produced, internally or with someone like you, and is set up in their CRM, like in HubSpot, like if somebody like me, and then that's it, right? Like, we're done. But there's no continuous improvement involved, right? Like, whether it's coaching, whether it's ongoing training, with like however you want to look at it, there's no, and even a lot of sales leaders aren't necessarily taking the time to like review deals. Okay, like why did you move this one? So then as a rep, often you're like, you want to move a deal forward to the next stage, and you're like, oh crap, I have to ask this question. I didn't ask this question. You just flip it as yes, and then you move on, right? Because you're like, you don't know what to do if you forget. Like, do I send an email? Do I have to reschedule a call? Do I have to this? Do I have to that? So I think, to me, that's the other part, right? First part we talked about was like leadership, maybe not being that fully invested into deploying it or understanding it or believing in it. The other one is no ongoing training, right? We will build the sales process. Often it'll happen like behind closed doors. right? Or maybe we'll have like the sales leader, like the team leader, or like the top salesperson come in and build it with the management team and then leave, right? I've seen that a lot, as opposed to being an inclusive process and an iterative process as well.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Fab, that I mean, we're touching a lot of things here, right? We're going from, human connection to the questions that need to be asked. Now, to me, the sales process are all the actions you need to do, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if we forget the methodology and if you're doing all the right actions, but you have sort of a crappy methodology in that, you're a little bit dry, you're a little bit unsure, or you're not inspiring confidence, we need to somehow, I really do think that needs to be we need to remind you of that in your sales process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good sales process will do that. I think a really good sales process in HubSpot has a playbook
Mm-hmm.
attached to it. And I say HubSpot because we all know Fab's a HubSpot guy.
So if you're not HubSpotting, you're losing.
Oh my God. This podcast is not sponsored by HubSpot. So you have a playbook in there that really reminds you of each step. And if your playbook has videos, then the body language and the emotions and all that can be treated in that video. And I think the clients that I've worked with that have a strong sales process also have a playbook, and they have a video playbook that really helps the new representatives and the older ones to say, oh yeah, it's true, I used to do that and I don't do anymore. Or the new ones to say, oh yeah, I need to start doing that. And that's where your sales process is also your online teacher, right?
And that's good. Exactly what I was going in, like with the ongoing training and knowledge, and like, okay, why did you do it this way? Did you check out the video? Like, Paul is clearly photogenic, but also shares a lot of great insights in his videos, and you should listen to them. And I think part of the training, and I know we're going very micro here, but this is just something I've uh, understood for myself, right, is to slow things down, right? Like usually often I see when we have a sales potential, right, somebody books a demo with us or a call with us, it's like our instinct is like, get this sale as fast as possible, right? But I think taking your time, like listening to your playbooks and teaching your reps to slow down a bit and take their time. And I understand some businesses are very like kind of one call close, and there's a high turnover here in sales. But I think within the realm of your reality is to slow things down. I think it's important to prepare your call. And you don't need to do like a 45-minute preparation for a 15-minute intro call, but it's just a matter of like taking down what am I trying to identify at this step of my process, right? This is our first call. I just want to understand kind of what their situation is, whatever you're building, but let's see a situation, a general impact that this is having on the business. Some things that I need to know that it's probably worth continuing this conversation on a larger call, deeper call. But I've seen so many reps like just that's it, they get it, and then they want to rush it, and they want to, like you were saying before, they want to jump to the presentation mode, the demo mode, and they're just fast forwarding over the most important part.
Well, it's very interesting because I think the companies that, the small percentage of companies that really use their sales process properly have understood this, and they really integrate this. And it's a communication tool. It's an ongoing learning tool. It's a reminder. It's an assistant. The companies that are at the other end of the spectrum, they see it as a pain in the ass, note-taking, big brother situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you need to realize is that your sales process will just help you continuously do the things that you should. And like when you're talking about, preparation, I just did a sales process with a client, and I put in the preparation stage.
Mm-hmm.
And in the preparation stage, we said what the person needs to do, and we tied a playbook in there. And it's a very important stage. If it's coming in from an inbound lead, some people even tie in what marketing's doing, like where how much nurturing is happening before and what needs to be identified before marketing throws it to sales, right? Well, that's part of the sales process too.
Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah, totally. And I think that's it. I think is there's this we forget that we need to review who we're speaking to. You're right. You mentioned, and that's without plugging in. That's one of the reasons I do like HubSpot, because it is an integrated system. It's easy to go hop in and see, okay, Paul's like downloaded this ebook, he's listened to this webinar, whatever. It gives you an idea of who they are as a person and allows you to have also more interesting conversations as well. I mean, I know like some reps like to go in blank, and it helps them understand. It helps them ask questions without being tied down to anything. But to me, it's like the importance of like teaching your reps to slow down within the realities of your business. Like I said, if you have a one call close, obviously your slowing down will be a lot faster than somebody whose sales process lasts 18 months. But I think slowing down is so critical, and taking the steps to remind yourself what you need to study, or not study, but what you need to do at this stage of the process is. And obviously, the more you do it, the longer you stay at the company, the more you'll develop some internal automations. But that's something I clearly see a lot, is trying to rush through that process to get to the presentation stage, which is what you were talking about at the beginning of
And I
the
think
show.
the other I totally agree with you, but I think the other problem that often happens is people will get a CRM and they'll just take the the generic sales process and take it as theirs.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake, because you're not adjusting it to your reality. And if I had to take away what I'm really trying to say today personally, and you tell me if you agree with me and if you maybe have different takeaways, but what I'm saying to leaders is make sure that your sales process is personalized and becomes a tool for your reps to get better, and that they see it. Because if you think it's a tool for your reps to get better and they don't see it, that's not. So you need to make sure of that, first thing. And secondly, as a salesperson, if you're in a company and you find that your sales process doesn't help you, speak to your leader and say, look, all this does is get me to write things down twice, and it's not helping me move forward, because that's not a good sales process. So your sales process should be helping you along as a reminder, and also be a sales tool where you can write in your CRM what you've done to help you make things better and move along, and to keep things normalized across the company so that you guys can have an intelligent conversation with the various team members. And the sales process is not just for the leaders to see where you're at, it's for the salesperson to make themselves more efficient and better at what they do.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have another takeaway, but I mean, to give an example, I mean, I could see that the best sales I've personally done are the ones where I followed my, scotch tape together sales process based off of a lot of our podcast discussions, and other like the readings that I've done. Because if you take your time to, okay, this is my introductory call, these are the 3, 4, 5 key things that I need to know, and I don't need to know everything because I need to schedule a second call, and how to prepare that call. It allows you to have so much better conversations than if you're just rushing to presentation and pricing mode, because then it's like you're just like abstract, in a way, like you're just coming in out of the blue, like this is my price and this is what we're going to do, and they're like, what? One thing I find though, and it's obviously all connected too, is that either because the leaders aren't fully invested, or they don't have they take the time, or they don't take the time to explain the process to their teams, is what often happens too, is that then their system isn't, their CRM, their HubSpot, their Salesforce, or Pipedrive isn't set up properly. And I mean, you mentioned like the out of the box, but even if it's been customized and tailored to their needs, it's not, it becomes heavy, right? Like they move, the rep moves from one stage to the next, and they have like 56 things to fill out because it was determined to be important. And it's not that they're not important. I'm just saying that there's also like a continuous optimization of that process. Like what made sense today when we're sitting in the room with Steve and Melissa and Linda and whoever my team is, and we're fleshing out what people are doing that's working and what people are doing that's not working, and we're writing it out, and it all makes sense. A week later, a month later, 3 months later, depending on your volume, a lot of that thing might not make sense anymore. It's like, okay, well, I don't need to have a property for this. Like we always ask for an NDA. I don't need to click that I've asked for the NDA. Like I know, because we can't showcase our product without having an NDA. So
what
I mean?
You're saying essentially is that it's always being optimized. It's always being you're always creating efficiency as you move along. Your sales process is not something you work on once and keep for 10 years. You can
Yeah,
always be making it better.
you should. I think you should. I think, again, depending on your volume, you should have like weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings about this and looking at what's working and having reports that help you determine what's working and what's not working, as well as feedback from reps, you
Yeah.
know?
And yeah, I totally agree. And maybe to wrap this up, I'd like to sort of define what I see as the important stages of a sales process, and tell me if you agree with me. So let's say you have outbound sales. Well, the first part of your process is going to be your preparation, right? So the research you're doing, and if it's
Mm-hmm.
inbound, well, what preparation are you doing before you speak to the people once you've gotten the inbound lead? And after that, it's your introduction. So what you're going to say, and then it's your discovery, which I think is the most important, where you're finding out everything about your client, everything. And after your discovery, to me, we've talked about this before, it's confirmation, then it's presentation, and it's close. And if you've noticed in where I didn't mention the word qualification, everyone's going to say, well, you got to have a qualification stage.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, you're qualifying along the way all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's an inbound lead, if you're disqualifying, you're sending it somewhere. If you've had the introduction and it's gone really bad, you're disqualifying it there. If you're having a discovery call and the discovery call doesn't go the way you think it needs to go for your product or your service, you're disqualifying it there. And you can disqualify at any stage of the game. So to me, a sales process, in a 5-minute thing, needs to have all of those phases that somehow work with your company. Now you might have RFPs in there, RFQs, you might
Yeah.
have, a bunch of people you're speaking to, you might have a bunch of influencers, decision makers, champions, whatever it might be. You might have cyclical, recurring sales. There's a whole bunch of things that can make your sales process different. But essentially, if you've got those basic elements in there, so the straight through qualification, the preparation, the introduction, the discovery, the confirmation of what you've discovered and what's important to them. Only then do you present. Once you presented, you close. If you have those basic elements, you have the basic ingredients to create a sales process tailored to your needs. Now, don't go in and just put in these stages. What happens at those stages? What are the milestones? You should have a couple of milestones, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 even milestones per stage before you jump to the next one. And that's important. And you need to ask your
Right.
salespeople and the best people internally to see that.
Yeah. And I think it's also a matter of asking what's working, yes, for sure, but also asking what's not working. I think it's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
important to look at deals that you've lost. Why did you lose them? Like, what
Yep.
information did you not have? Did they ghost you? Which stage did they drop off at, and stuff like that. So if you had to set up a CRM today, let's call HubSpot because I know their terminology is. What kind of steps would you do? Obviously, you've talked about the stages, but it's not just a matter of just setting up those stages in your pipeline. How do you identify each of those milestones
So
that you talked about?
what I normally do when I'm helping a client set up a sales process, let's say I know they have HubSpot, for example, right? Because I know HubSpot. The first thing I'll do is I'll ask them, what happens when you guys do sales? So tell me what you do now, what's going on? And I'll ask them to define their current sales process. And sometimes I discover things in their current sales process that we're going to need to keep in the new sales process. And sometimes there are things that are redundant or whatnot, and then we make sure to eliminate this. And sometimes we take one sales process and we split them into 3 because there's an inbound, there's an outbound, and there's a recurring sales process, or there's an account management sales process. But the first thing that I'll do is I'll literally interview the stakeholders to make sure I understand how it is that they work internally. And I make sure that I'm very, very flexible to understand the things that work well. So I'm totally myself in discovery mode. I don't go in with any preconceived notions of where I want to slot them into. I just make sure that I'm listening to say, okay, why do you do it this way? Why is it important? And from there, we build the sales process together that they agree with because it's something that's going to help them move forward and normalize something that maybe 5 or 6 people do really well or 25 people do really well, bring it together to take the best practices and stick it into a sales process with milestones. But the milestones might be, are you speaking to the decision maker? The milestone might be, do you feel, what quotient or relationship level have you reached with your decision maker? and that's the self-analysis. It's saying, okay, where are we at? And there's a few questions you need to ask yourself to say, where am I at? Are they sharing information with me? Do they see me as someone they can trust? So there's a bunch of different things you can do along the way to make sure that there's that you create a sales process that reflects the reality of what you do. And you said it before, if it's a one call close, your sales process is probably very different than if it's a 6-month sales cycle. And 6-month sales cycle, you might have a lot more milestones, and you might even include a nurture phase in there, because one client I was speaking to recently, they speak to an influencer, then the influencer goes out and talks to people, then there might be a few months before a potential client comes in, and then that client needs to think about it because it's a huge project. Then there needs to be nurturing along the way. Then you come back, and then you'll do the close. So you might have some nurture points in there, and that's something that's really dependent on the different types of sales processes or sales processes that we personalize for you. You might have 2 or 3 nurture points. You might just have 1 nurture point. You may not have any nurture points if it's a one call close, right? So I don't. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So what I'm taking away is so you have your stages, which you set up obviously in your system. Then you have your key milestones, and you set those up as required properties to move from one stage to the next.
Yep.
And again, it's not about forcing your rep to, it's not about it being a big brother. It's about helping them, reminding them that, hey, if I want to move from prepared to discovery or first session or whatever you want to call it, I need to have validated these 2-3 things or whatever, and obviously that changes. And what I liked before is that then you build your playbooks, especially if you're in HubSpot and you have the enterprise tier, you build these really detailed playbooks that are just more helpful, because you can add your videos, you can create training videos and remind them of what has to happen at this stage. And it doesn't need to be a 45-minute long dissertation on the presentation stage, but it could be a few, 2-3, a minute, 2 minutes about push this stage matters and so on and so forth. And one thing I like about what you do, having obviously worked with you on a few processes, is that a lot of sales processes are the probability of closing is based on which stage it's at. What I like some of what you do is also then those milestones are actually what dictate the probability of closing, which I really enjoy that you do, because it's not necessarily that we've had a demo, so there's a 75% chance of closing, and you can kind of average it out to maybe when people get to this stage. But I like that also it's hypothetically, was the decision maker present at this demo? If they're not, that reduces the chances of closing, because the person who's making the decision wasn't there.
Not there,
right?
yeah.
And so I like that. And so then it's about tailoring to your needs. And I think, and then setting up reports that track the efficiency of your process, and then having those regular meetings with your team, again, depending on your volume, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually, if it's a very low volume, high margin type of thing, to optimize and improve as you go. I think that's critical.
Yeah, and that's another thing. We talk about probability. At first, you're going to guesstimate the probabilities, right? You're going to attach it to different milestones. But really, ultimately, once you have the data after 2-3 years of selling, you can actually literally go back, and if you've got all your data done properly, you can establish some true real world data probabilities that come from the fact that you've done this in the past. So so that's interesting. And milestone affecting the probability of what you do is true, right? So, and that's important. And but okay, so and yeah, Fab and I work together. We understand each other's way of functioning. And I know, Fab, let's say you had to say 2 things. One, to the salesperson to try to convince them to follow a specific sales process, and 2, to the leader to make it better. What would you say to them? 2 different
to make the process better,
to make
the adoption better.
To make the adoption better.
Yeah, I think for the salesperson, I would be, I don't know, maybe I'm being simplistic here, but I would try it out, give it a shot. Compare your sales when you're doing it your way versus your sales versus when you're doing it the way that we've agreed on as a team to make it better. And I'll coach you along the way if you need to. But for me, it would be try it out. And I think usually the proof is in the pudding, or whatever that expression is. But because your process is probably going to encourage you to take the time to ask better not ask better, but at least you need to answer better, have the answers to better questions, right? And it's going to force you to pull back from your need to like just present or demo or you know, whatever you do. And as a sales leader, I would just spend time with your team, like train them, coach them, look at the reports, yes, to see who's getting it, who's not getting it, what's working, what's not working, but spend some time, your one-on-ones weekly, like pick a deal and ask why or why not, and things like that. I would just stick with it. I think there's a change management process involved there where we're going from today no sales process or wonky sales process or whatever to tomorrow a new sales process. That's a change, right? Like young reps don't necessarily get it. More senior reps are like, well, I've always done it this way and it worked for me. So there's a change management there. And so as a leader, you have to kind of stick with it and work with them and
Yeah,
improve it with them.
I like that. I really like what you said about salespeople. Try it out and then give your feedback. And I really like what you say about the leadership. Make sure that you're finding out why the process maybe isn't working at times, or why people are having a hard time with certain business, but follow it through the sales process. I really like that. And maybe what I would add to the leadership part is be open to adjusting your sales process to whatever the salespeople tell you they see in the field, or ways of making it more efficient and creating, like you said, optimizing it.
Yeah.
And that's going to come mostly from your salespeople, because they're the ones living and breathing the sales process.
Awesome, Paul. Listen, this was probably one of my favorite shows. So thanks for bringing this topic up. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Every show is my favorite show.
Funny. All right. Take care, Paul. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.